welcome Jamarl Thomas, an
Thank
amazing,
you.
progressive, independent journalist who has interviewed me a couple of times on the subject of Julian Assange. So it's interesting to be in the reversed position on that today. So, Jamarl, since I've spoken with you about Julian Assange and the developments around his case, a lot of stuff has happened, and not all of it has been positive in terms of Ecuador's relationship with the US and et
Oh
cetera, et
God, yeah.
cetera. And the
Right.
news about Comey scuttling the attempt to negotiate between the Trump administration and WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to hear, what your take is on all of this news we've had recently.
Um. So here's the thing: the United States, the relationship with the United States towards South America has not necessarily been the best. Going with this idea that we, for the most part, can control the politics of South America. That's in our sphere of influence. We've been the big brother that hasn't necessarily been the big brother to the area of South America. Ecuador has been one of those countries. The previous president, I think his name is Correa. Is that I can't think, I'm missing the names.
Yes.
I may mix the name. But the previous president, Correa, the one who they're trying to bring up on charges now, that cat, he, however, had this very strong understanding of Ecuador as a country. We are an independent nation, just like any other independent nation. You will respect us as such. I respect him as such. I understand where he's coming from with it. The new president, not so much. And so there is a fear that the United States influence in that other country has been resumed with the new president and with the deal signed, or you can say the military agreement that they signed. That doesn't look good for Assange. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And so it looks a little weird that it looks like they're politically going after the guy who put Assange up, who has eventually protected Assange. We're angry that you protected Assange, so we're going to put our thumb on you with this guy, put our thumb in your eye. And then you have this other part where he could have actually gotten out. It wasn't just Comey. It was Comey and what is Warner? I think it was Warner.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Essentially, hey, we can tell you definitively what happened. We can let you know what happened. And he's like, yeah, no.
That's not convenient. We'd rather not,
We don't want to
Yeah.
know that. We don't want to know that. We're perfectly okay with what we believe Russia did it. Just nothing to see here, folks. Yeah. It's amazing. That part's amazing. That part blew me away too. I mean, look, either you want to know what took place or you don't. And I think newspapers need to be very careful with this idea of allowing WikiLeaks to be considered, what is it, a non-state actor or a non-state editor or something to that effect.
I believe it was Mike Pompeo called them a hostile non-state intelligence service, and in the same breath, he then compared WikiLeaks with Al Qaeda. Literally, it's just
amazing,
mind-blowing.
New York Times, and the wild part about this is when they get leaks, it's perfectly okay. So I give you a perfect example. The recent leak that came out saying that North Korea had no intention of giving away or giving them nuclear weapons. That was a leak. That was a leak by the intelligence services. Nobody cared. Nobody took issue with that in the least. It was a leak, and everybody was fine with that particular leak. It seems that they pick and choose the leaks that they're okay with. That's what it seems like. That's exactly what it seems like. And you had inconvenient leaks.
Absolutely. And I think in addition to observing the connection between the, arrest orders that have been issued against Rafael Correa, the previous president of Ecuador, it's interesting as well to see the developments in Kim.com's case. And we were honored to have Kim.com on earlier in this Vigil speaking and really calling out Donald Trump for not protecting and supporting Julian Assange as a truth-telling journalist. But again, and as Kim.com has said many times, he believes that part of the reason for the vitriol behind the persecution of himself is because he financially supported and supports WikiLeaks. And so with Correa, with Kim.com, everyone who supported Julian Assange is also being punished in addition to what is being actually done to Julian himself. And so, it's a bleak picture, but I think that, and correct me, but if you have a different view on this, but it seems like the only way we can deal with this bleak picture is by recognizing it before we can act on it and act to change it.
I agree with you, but Jesus Christ, it is bleak. It is bleak. Um, it's bizarre to me. Like, I guess I'll look at it as, do you want to know what your government is doing or not? Yes or no? And if you don't want to know, that's a little scary. That you don't want to know, that's the first part. And if you do want to know, how do you go about doing that? And if, when you look at the media, much of it is this person, anonymous source said this. That's what it would go by. Sources in the government said this. When you look at your media, a lot of it is government says, sources in the government says, some spook told me. That's not news. That's you being told what they want you to tell the other public, as opposed to actually getting out what the people need to know. Those things are different. What they need to know versus what you're told are different. Assange. I mean, I don't quite understand. I understand it from the standpoint of somebody who's, let's say, one of these spooks and they're trying to withhold certain information. Fair enough. I get it. I don't get it from the media types. I don't get it from the regular people who look at this stuff. I mean, Assange's impact has been monumental, and it's been positive, at least if you're talking about from the standpoint of us. It's amazing.
Absolutely. And I think that as an independent journalist, as a journalist who is not going with that legacy press outlet mentality, it's one of the things that you and other journalists do, independent journalists do, is you're informing the public, you're educating the public in a way that they're not educated by mainstream media outlets. How much of a barrier do you feel that there is amongst your audience when it comes to speaking the truth about Julian Assange? Do you get resistance for covering that, or is it, do people kind of generally get the general drift, or how much ignorance is there out there about that?
So, it's funny, two things. Journalists is way too polite. I thank you for it, but way too polite. The second thing, I don't have resistance covering this. But this is our sandbox. If there was a guy that I used to work with. He used to be in the military, and he would be like, "Yeah, Julian Assange should be shot." And as you're having a conversation, it's like, well, there's certain things that shouldn't be told. It's like, but how do you know what those things are? Like, how do you know? How could I keep account what my government is doing if I don't know? So 9/11 happens, and the first thing is like, oh my God, we need to go over there and fight the terrorists. How do you know? Why do you think that happened? It's like, do you think that it just came out of the blue? And is it possible that your government was doing something behind the scenes that may have pissed people off? But you don't know that. I guess the point is blowback in regards to stuff that we're doing in the shadows that people don't know. I don't get resistance from that because my audience is a little bit more, you can call it woke on this stuff, and I'm using woke from the standpoint of they want to know. They're not in this bubble. They're not in the bubble of not wanting to know. The sandbox, the bubble to which we exist, are people who are somewhat cynical. It's people who are somewhat pissed off. You have some who know a problem exists, and even if they don't fully agree with me in the way that I go about designating it, they still know something is there, even if they have a hand on it. No, my audience is more in the lines of, this is a problem. We should know what our government is doing. We need to hold government accountable. And you can't do that without knowledge of what your government is doing. That's where my audience is. I don't know if they would always be that way in perpetuity, but right now, that's where they are.
Well, that's good. That's
good.
positive.
Yeah,
definitely. Good. And I think as well, like, as you say, we can all have a different idea on how to address some of the problems. But the fact is that most of us across the spectrum sort of agree that we're looking at a problem and that it's very, very serious. And I think that is part of the unity of this vigil, is that, we all see the massive, massive problem, which is the punishment and persecution of a truth teller.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, how you think that that we can move forward. How can we build this vigil and these demonstrations of solidarity into a mass movement, in your opinion?
Wow, that's a good question, right? I mean, ultimately, yeah. I mean, ultimately, the question is, how do you change things? I mean, I think that's what you're getting at. How
Yeah.
how is it when during the protests for net neutrality, people would stand outside of like AT&T or something like that and scream at that AT&T, and it's like, oh God, those are just workers. Why are you screaming at the workers in that place? It's like the people you need to be screaming at, dragging out on the rail, the people in Washington that put these cronies in. You can try to get to the plutocrats involved, but how do you get to them? I don't know how you change things without people being. Look, this is going to sound bad, and I don't mean this to sound bad, but I don't know how you change things without people being in distress to change things. I've often found that people often just don't care. They're not necessarily bad, or people aren't necessarily bad. They just go about their way. They just want to, deal with their kids and family. They just want to live their lives. I think what you're asking is, how do you break complacency? How do you get people out of that complacent state and doing something that's that changes the way things are, the status quo? I don't know how you do that. I mean, outside of some kind of chaos, I don't necessarily think things change without some level of chaos to push those things to change. It's like putting heat on something to boil. But this very specific point is different from the standpoint of Assange. Like, it's one thing if you're having this case of saying, hey, Republicans are going to take Social Security and Medicare. That's specific. This is what they're trying to do. This is what needs to be stopped. People are like, oh my God, my grandmother's going to be without healthcare. This is a little different. This is more refined. There's somebody who's being put in prison because they're releasing information that the public itself is great for the public, is bad for the people in power themselves. This idea of waste, fraud, and abuse in the government essentially hiding information, not because the information is state secrets, but because they don't necessarily want to be embarrassed by the information. You have a lot of older people who still trust what the government says. And this mainstream media pointing to and saying, Assange, that guy did something. They stand by it. They stand by it. I don't know how you break complacency on that very specific point. It's not, you've had a society that's kind of just drifted in a direction. And even the movements themselves have, fizzled away. Even some of this like war, anti-war. War seems to be a big galvanizer. We've been at war for 20 years? Stuff has floated away. I don't know how you get people to care. Honestly, I don't. In my channel, I assume that people galvanize around a particular opinion. What I can see, though, is it does seem like people are changing. But I don't know if that's, we're always stuck in the context of time. Like, we're always stuck in this kind of, like, I don't know what people were like in the 60s. So I don't necessarily know what like people were 70s and 80s and 90s. I can only tell you what people like kind of now. It seems like the political winds are changing. It seems like people are pissed off enough where it's given a shift, but I'm not certain. I don't know how to answer that question. I've been asking myself the exact same question. How do you get
and one of our previous guests was Cynthia McKinney, and I thought it was really telling when she said,
awesome.
Yes, she's one of my heroines, and she said, that we have to replace the system because the system is broken. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but I think that also leads into discussions that we've had in previous vigils with some guests who said, in their opinion, the only thing left to do to really change things is civil disobedience. And I don't know what form that would take, but I think that is worth discussing, or at least worth thinking about, considering the depth of seriousness of the situation that Julian Assange is facing right now.
Yeah. Because he's been 6 years? It's been 6 years where he's been stuck in an Ecuadorean embassy, and his chances. It's funny. Correa have kind of made this point that the guy who replaced him, I can't think of his name for the life of me. That the guy is almost like a traitor. Call the guy a traitor. Because you must understand, from the standpoint of Korea, I governed this country in a way. There was one particular episode where the United States wanted to put a military base or keep a military base in Ecuador, to which he said, can I keep a military base in Florida? Now, that's a fair point. If you have a military base here, why can't I have one there? Of course, which after that, the United States said no, in which case the deal went apart. That's something about, that's an understanding of your own sovereignty that I actually like. The new president, not so much. And you would imagine Correa may look at the new president saying, okay, he doesn't necessarily have the same view of Ecuador that I do. I can understand where he's coming from on this. I mean, come on. The guy's been in prison for all intents and purposes for 6 years. And how on earth is the United States charging him with anything when he's not a United States citizen? I find this to be amazing. Oh, yeah, and you heard, what's his name? Adam Schiff talking about, we'll have a conversation with him. He's here and all this other stuff, kind of giving this indication that there's a warrant or something hiding behind whatever Britain is doing. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's a really great point that we haven't covered enough in this vigil, is the fact that those types of admissions show you exactly what is behind the UK's sort of siege of the embassy. It has obviously nothing to do with an investigation in Sweden that was already dropped a year ago. It's everything to do with the intent of the United States military-industrial complex to prosecute Assange.
And Sweden was pressured, by the way. Sweden was pressured to keep that warrant up. In which case, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, Britain pressured Sweden to keep that warrant for the time frame that they did.
That's exactly right.
Got rid of it. And at this point now in the UK, it's the only thing that's hanging out so far, saying we're going to arrest him if he steps out the embassy. On what? Well, he broke his violation. What do you mean? He broke his violation. They're trying to say because he didn't go to jail when they told him to go to jail on what was going to be a trumped-up charge, that he needs to be arrested. That's amazing. I mean, it's like the original case, the original trial or case is gone. That's been dropped. The thing that's there is him not going to jail for a trial or for a case. I'm saying this wrong. I'm really saying this poorly. But essentially, him not going to trial was the thing that they're holding him on now. I find that to be amazing. Yeah, I find it to be amazing. And yet, here we are. United Nations, let him go. Yet, here we are. Here we are.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, they did, his lawyers, his legal team did attempt to have that outstanding warrant for his arrest in the UK dismissed because the investigation it was in relation to was dropped. And that is why it is so ridiculous that this, UK military industrial complex linked magistrate ended up ruling against him. The outright conflict of interest and corruption surrounding this case is, unbelievable, and it's so disappointing that so much of the legacy press is not only ignoring that, but then churning out smear pieces against Assange, like we saw in the last few weeks with the Guardians. Churning out multiple smear pieces. It's just horrendous. But
well, the guy that wrote that piece was the guy that got shredded on Real News Network. I don't know if you remember this. Well, he was one of the people that was on that piece. Shredded, completely shredded. Aaron Matei absolutely ate him alive because the guy was trying to make this case about Russia meddling, and he's talking about stuff that took place like 30 years ago, as if Vladimir Putin was grooming him since Trump was an infant. It was nonsense. But that was one of the people writing that piece. And the amazing part about this is the Guardian, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the papers that printed the WikiLeaks stuff, right? Or am I wrong on this?
In the beginning, I believe that they were a media partner with WikiLeaks, and that's why it's such an added betrayal that they turn around and do this to Julian Assange. Absolutely, it's awful. I believe that.
The Australian government, have you heard anything else about what they were doing? I know the Australian government met with Assange recently, but I don't know if I haven't heard anything else from them.
Yeah, I thought that was it seemed like that might be a really positive development. I know that I have not heard anything more of that, and we don't know what was discussed during that meeting, but I'm glad that Australian officials did actually visit him in the embassy and were able to see the conditions that he's in. And there have been many calls from Australia, for the Australian government to bring him home, and protect him as the citizen he is. And especially like the World Socialist website and groups associated with them have been really showcasing the support for Julian Assange amongst workers and youth in Australia. And I think that has been a really positive development. But no, as far as the details of that meeting or any other outcome from that, I have not heard of anything. And if our viewers have that I've missed it, please let us know and we'll discuss that. And speaking of our YouTube viewers, if you guys have any questions for Jamarl, please put them in the YouTube chat. We will pick them up on our Etherpad and we will ask them because we would really like to have your participation in this discussion. But Jamarl, what do you think are some of the ways that maybe we haven't discussed, or maybe we have, in which our audience could express solidarity with Julian Assange and just support, even separating support from trying to make a as people have contacted me so many times on social media saying, well, why can't we just get a Wi-Fi hotspot next to the embassy, et cetera, and we know that can't happen because of the type of jammers they're using. But how can we, in this situation, show solidarity with Julian Assange?
He still doesn't have they've still shut off internet access and everything else to do. Wow. I know they shut it off. The president mentioned, he said he was going. Well, the wild part about this is they said, well, look, we're not going to wobble on this idea of keeping them in, meaning we will keep them protected there, but he's not going to be able to say anything. Which is like, what? It's like he's not going to be able to say anything political and say anything something else, which is all intents and purposes. You shut him up for He can't open his mouth about pretty much anything. I would imagine visuals like this show solidarity. If he knows about those visuals, definitely shows solidarity. I don't necessarily know how much access he has looking at things outside of the embassy. I would imagine people who know him tell him, say, hey, you have a lot of people out there who's standing beside you. I don't know how much. I don't know. I mean, some of the stuff is hard to answer. Like visuals show solidarity. Him knowing that people are out there with a torch burning for him shows solidarity. I guess the question really does boil down to this one of what is journalism? But I'm sorry, that's a different question. But the solidarity.
No, I think that's a great discussion to have. I think So please
the reason
continue.
I say that is because if what Assange is doing is journalism, meaning if Hillary Clinton runs an election with Assange was out before that. He was releasing information before that. But you release speeches impeaching the credibility of one of the candidates. That's, mind you, stuff that she was lying about, stuff she didn't want people to know. You release speeches showing, impeaching the credibility of that particular candidate. Now, part of the political class hates that. But that is journalism. That is true. That is substantive to the political discussion that we're having, especially when we're talking about who we're going to elect to be president of the United States. When you release information showing that the United States government is lying about spying, and the level of spying is breathtaking and goes beyond anything that was taking place in something like the Soviet Union, that's amazing. It's like, how can you... Like, even now, The Intercept released the thing showing the spy networks all throughout the United States, these major centers, these major hubs, essentially where the AT&T is just giving information over to the NSA. That is amazing. Like, that is mind-blowing information. And the public just kind of, Now, it's the that I don't get. That's the part that I never quite understand. It's the, okay, so what? I don't get the so what. You would think that would be a big deal. It's like your government is spying on you. So what? It's like, yeah, but when the Soviet Union was doing it, you thought it was a big deal. Yeah, but it's our government. So what? I think people get into this mindset that if people look at history, like look at, let's say like Nazi Germany or Soviet Union or one of those regimes, what was it like for the regular person going about their day in one of those countries? I guarantee you, they didn't think that they were in a regime. Like they thought that our country is a country like every other country, and there's some things that are good and bad. There's certain atrocities that take place. Sometimes they fuck up, sometimes they do good. Ultimately, none of those people got up in the morning thinking they were goblins or horrible people. I suggest that people look at their country from the standpoint of the way people in those countries looked at theirs. And I'm saying that to say, what was the day in the life of somebody who's living in one of those countries versus what is the day in the life of an American today? And when you look at the spy apparatus that was set up in those countries, look at what is spy apparatus that's set up in this country. I'm trying to say, look at your country from a third-person perspective. And you can't do that if the only thing you get is Chuck Todd repeating something that came on a teleprompter, telling you how awesome your country is and how everybody else sucks and we're fighting the good battle and we may fuck up, but we are doing God's work and all this other stuff. You need independent journalism to get something that's out of that bubble saying, this is the reality of the situation. That's journalism. I mean, that's literally what it is. It's the watchdog. It's the thing that's supposed to actually hold power accountable. And what you have is not holding power accountable from a standpoint of media.
Absolutely. And I think I remember in 2013 when the Snowden revelations were hitting the mainstream media so much. And I had that same feeling of watching people around me, especially even in college where, people you would expect.
Supposed to be rowdy.
Yeah, exactly. The youth to be more, rebellious and concerned about all of this. And literally it was as if nothing had happened. They made a point often to say, well, I have nothing to hide and I don't care. So yeah, I think that the complacency on this is unbelievable.
That's I hate that argument. I hate that argument that people will make. Well, I have nothing to hide, so what? It's like, what do you mean you have nothing to hide, so what? That's not really the point. It's not about whether or not you have anything to hide. That information can be used in all sorts of ways to put pressure, to put influence. It's just not anybody's business. It's your own space. It's your own privacy. Why is people digging into other people's privacy? I don't understand this argument. I have nothing to hide. So in every context, like we would have to believe that in every situation, that person would have absolutely nothing to hide. And let's be honest, how people act when somebody is watching them versus how people act when they're left to their own devices is a little different. It's a little different. Come on. I have nothing to hide. Whatever. They have nothing to hide up to a point. I bet if their email stuff got out, they'd be horrified by that information get out. I think what they're saying is they don't necessarily believe that their information is going to adversely affect them. I think that's what it boils down to. This is always going to affect somebody else. So I don't care. It's like this guy was watching some porn about, some women stepping on ants. It's like, oh God, I'm horrified about this. Now, there's nothing wrong with you doing that. It's up to you to watch something like that. I don't necessarily get it, but whatever. God bless. But you wouldn't want that out. And imagine you being a political leader or you being, let's say, leader of a movement. Hell, let's say you're part of some organization and that information gets out or that information was used again. I'm just making the point that...
Or it could be even fabricated against people, and a lot of us wouldn't know the difference. It's amazing. And I think taking that bird's eye view, that what you just described as the third party view, I think one of the most damaging preventatives of people actually breaking that complacency and moving against the corruption that we have is the false sense of moral authority on the part of the US, like US exceptionalism and all of that. I think that protects people from facing cognitive dissonance on a lot of these issues.
It's so weird, man. And I try to break this idea of you're not exceptional. Why do you believe you're exceptional? That's magical thinking. That's almost like saying there's a such thing as a king and a queen. There is no such thing as a king and a queen. There are people who got other people stupid enough to believe and call them kings and queens and give them extra money and all this other stuff and pretend as if there's magistry and power. No, that's nonsense. They just have more money. And having more money doesn't necessarily make you any more special than anybody else. You just have more money. Your society was stupid enough to give you more cash. Well, this is kind of the American exceptionalism thing. It's the same thing. This idea that you are somehow magically exceptional because you were born in a particular country is no more, exceptional than the king or the queen of England. It's nonsense. You're not magical. The United States was able to get a magnificent boon in economics purely due because of the war. I mean, when you got into this thing of World War One, World War Two, Europe was devastated. So yeah, you can imagine that there would be somewhat of an economic boom in a country that wasn't devastated and could just pump shit out. We were able to get a magnificent middle class. Yes. But if you notice, the gains of that started to get clawed back the moment that the other countries started to tick up. Meaning, we're no longer in this kind of unipolar world. We're in a country with multiple power centers. The moment that those multiple power centers started coming into play, that exceptionalism stuff starts wearing away because it was never there in the first place. Not to mention that point of view ends up with us being in more wars. Imagine the situation where the American public doesn't quite understand that another country has a perspective. Think Vietnam. We go into a country, we blow the shit out of that country from the perspective of the United States. We're fighting communism. We kill millions in that war. And you come to find out that the Vietnamese thought that we were just going to be colonizers like the French. And we thought, well, it depends on who you're talking to, but even if you're going with this idea of battling communism, it's still somewhat of a stupid excuse to kill and murder 2 million people. I mean,
absolutely, and there are so many examples of that type of meddling in the sovereign affairs of nations that the United States has done via agencies like the CIA and on and on and on. And I mean, one example I think I went back to with a guest earlier today was the example of the democratically elected government in Chile, which was then we destabilized, and then we had this awful Augusto Pinochet come in, and we supported them. And increasing the irony is the fact that we let that when an extradition attempt was made on Pinochet, the UK let him off for health reasons. And this is somebody who's a human rights abuser, a torturer, and yet Julian Assange, as a journalist, is not given clemency for health reasons at all, despite the fact that he's suffering. The irony is horrible, and I wish we really would call out the UK and the US for the hypocrites that they are on these cases.
Well, here's the thing, and this maybe gets to your question of this idea of how do you get people involved or get people fired up about it. They don't know. Nobody knows that shit. Like, nobody knows that that we were responsible for those toppling governments. Like it came up on Fox News where they asked, I can't think of his name, it was one of those spooks, and they asked him about, hey, do we get involved in doing this stuff? And he's like, yeah, but only for the right reasons. And starts giggling about it. Mind you, he's talking about taking down other governments. He's, giggling like a schoolgirl. And I think it was Laura Ingraham. She's laughing with him. Oh, it's so funny. Taking it down other governments. It's great. All the chaos we're causing. It's fucking awesome. Most people don't know that. What she just said, or that spook said, was probably mind-blowing to a lot of people who are like in their 60s, like, oh my God, we're taking down governments? But then he adds the joiner, but only for the right reasons, which calms them down and says, okay, well, yeah, we're probably just doing it for good stuff. Superman is good and all this other stuff. I don't think they know. Like, I was doing the thing on my show about Guatemala, how, again, just like you said in Chile, Guatemala was something similar, where Arbenz, the president, wins the election, goes on for land reforms. United Fruit is one of the companies that are there. United Fruit works with the United States government, pushing this propaganda that because he wanted modest reforms from the standpoint of work, I think it was like a work week, and I think he might have wanted like collective bargaining rights, those type of things, just basic minimum wage. And made this argument that there was a communist revolt in Guatemala that needed to be put down. The United States works, again, in the same method that it works in many other countries, work through like organizations, creates strife, chaos, and then eventually comes up with backing one of the groups that topples the government. He had a military coup in Guatemala backed by the CIA. The CIA even bombed the capital. Now, then this is pretty amazing. Then the people who took over, the guy who took over was a military commander, essentially got rid of all the reforms and put his thumb on the back of the workers there at the behest of United Fruit. The United Fruit supported his regime, gave him tons of money. He was happy. United Fruit was happy. The people in that particular Guatemala, not so much. Banana Republic. Exactly. They don't know that. Like they don't. I don't think they quite get the influence that we've had in some of these countries. They look at this argument, and this gets to this conversation about the deportations and immigration. Like, people are coming to the country and people are like, wow, dare you come to our country? And it's like, how dare you burn down our house? It goes both ways. But they never have the argument at the standpoint of why are the people coming to the country in the first place? It's always these people are coming to our country. Why can't they get their own country in order? They miss that other part of the argument of, yes, but we also have influence in what was taking place over the last 50, 60 years in our country.
Definitely. We see the same thing in places like Syria and the Middle East, which then, you know, the displaced people then flee and end up in Europe. And so, yeah, people have it seems like a lot of people have such a superficial understanding of how these things are happening and why. And, you know, if we really wanted to solve a lot of these problems, it would just be as simple as the United States not spending its tax money on killing innocent people. You know?
Yeah.
It's mine.
Yeah. $1 trillion. Like, people were like, yeah, man, you can't have health care, but we can have $1 trillion military budget. Think about that shit. $1 trillion. Like, if you're talking about the black budget, if you're talking about like defense or things that we spend internally for defense, you're talking like $1 trillion military budget. That is an amazing amount of money. Think about that. How much money? That's an amazing sum of money. Like, that sum of money is, you can cut that budget in half and still be twice as much as the next largest person. Like, they try to put that in context of how much money is spent. And the half of that budget that you cut in at that point, it can pay for healthcare. It can pay for a jobs program. It can pay for all sorts of shit.
Flint's water 5 times over and more. Yeah, really. And I mean, Mark Sloboda, who is a geopolitical kind of expert earlier today, was talking about how that spending of money on militaristic, you know, kind of conquering around the world is part of this American empire or hegemony, as he put it. And I think it's important to kind of observe how this is the conversation we're having all throughout this visual with different guests, and how Julian Assange's work has been unique, not in simply, you know, saying, oh, that's a bad thing and wagging its finger, but by exposing what it really is and how it works more than anybody else has, I think.
Yeah, he has. I mean, it really has. It's funny. When I was younger, I don't think I paid too much attention to it. I think it's one of those things where you're aware of the military budget, but you're not necessarily fully aware of it. And if you're born in this country and raised in this country, you don't really pay too much attention to what goes on overseas. So you don't necessarily know how the social democracies are arranged in Europe. Then when you become aware of it, you're like, whoa, they got what? They have what? Look, as a collective, we can choose how we want to organize ourselves. And we can choose to spend $1 trillion on military, or we can choose not to spend $1 trillion on military. And what I would guarantee you is we're creating our monsters, meaning the monsters that we're looking for, the monsters we're going to find if we're spending that money on military. And by the way, even on another point, just because you spend $1 trillion doesn't mean you're getting $1 trillion back. It's like healthcare.
Very important. You
may spend 4 times as much as everyone else around the globe, but you're like 30th. You're like 33rd, if I remember the last time I looked, in the ranking of healthcare. Like, even Cuba is higher than us in healthcare. Just because you spend it doesn't necessarily mean you're getting it back in return in spades. You are spending trillions. Like, you're spending $1 trillion on military. And I'm making this point of, you're dealing with capitalist enterprises, many of which are putting money in their pockets, many of which are putting money in these kind of pro projects. One of the planes, I think it was the F-35. The thing was a jalopy. The thing barely worked. And they're talking about spending like $1 trillion on that thing over the course of X number of years. It's like the money that we're spending on this stuff becomes, like, it's hard to grasp the amount of cash that is being dumped into just a hole. And yes, there's some people who are benefiting magnificently from it. There's some people where the money trickles down into other companies where the workers may get a little bit of it. But this is a market of death to some degree.
Definitely.
Planes, boats, bullets, all these things kill people. Like it's essentially an economy that purely from the standpoint of murder. We can do different. It doesn't have to be that way.
And what's so wonderful and incredible is earlier we also had an anti-war libertarian who was saying the exact same thing.
Yes.
That we're wasting so much money on this economy of death. And I think the one positive thing I can see out from this discussion is it seems very clear to me that part of the reason that there is this empire of surveillance and killing and injustice is in part because of how afraid the powers that be are of the populace. That's why they have to surveil us so much. And I think that in some ways that can be empowering to understand that actually they fear us as a totality, as a collective. And, if we can somehow take advantage of that and fight in that way, that's part of what this vigil is about anyway. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, they should. I mean, democracy is always messy. And democracy is one of those things that's fairly trusted by the people in authority. I mean, even if you're talking about the Constitution, if you listen to the conversations they were having during the time they were creating it, it wasn't about democracy. It was the opposite. Oh, we can't let these masses get control of things. I mean, after all, they'll just take the cash and loot the place. No, the way we arranged was in a way to some degree put gum in the works of this idea of a democratic process. So democracy is not the thing that's always trusted. If you remember, during the time where there was a coup in Iraq, not before Saddam took office, he was egalitarian. He was trying to say, look, we're going to take the oil wealth, we're going to spread it, we're going to use it for the country itself. That was in Iraq. The United States, Britain, those countries freaked out because the guy who they had in at the time was a strong man who they knew was going to give them the oil at a decent price. They flipped out. The United States was one of the backers of the Ba'ath Party, which essentially helped Saddam get office. Same thing with Iran. Democratically elected government. Again, they took office, took issue because he wanted to use the oil wealth for himself. Or, I'm sorry, for the country itself, meaning he wanted to take a percentage of the oil wealth and get a higher percentage off of it than what he was getting from Britain. The CIA, the United States, assisted in the coup. Democracy is messy. Democracy oftentimes is distrusted by people in authority because it's democracy after all. If you listen to the way they talk about quote-unquote populism, oh, the populists, these people are populists. That's actually a good thing. Listen to Tony Blair, that crook who needs to be in a prison. I was listening to him this morning talk about Brexit. I was shocked that Tony Blair was just walking about. Tony Blair needs to be in prison. But Tony Blair was like, same thing. The left, how do you say it? The left in Britain has been overtaken by a left-wing faction of the far left of the party. I love that. Yeah, they should be, because that's what Labor is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a left party. Same thing.
Exactly.
It's populism is not a bad thing, man. That's actually a good thing. The population get involved in the political process. I love it.
And that I think that exactly what you're pointing to is that sense I was kind of mentioning earlier about how afraid they are, these corrupt interests are of us as a collective, and whether that's populism, in a sense of Brexit, or whether it's populism in the form of, support for Bernie Sanders. I think all of it scares the powers that be. And
believe it or not,
yeah,
I mean, look, it's people, I think, know something is wrong, but they don't know what it is. That's what I think. I think Sanders and Trump were the two expressions of that, of we don't like the system the way it is. Now, I don't necessarily like that they went to Trump, but I do acknowledge that Trump is a right-wing expression of a populist attitude of, fuck the system. I don't like the way this is going. I don't like this, full stop. And Brexit, yeah, it was them throwing a brick through the window of the establishment. They didn't even know what Brexit was, and they said yes. You know what I mean? It's like, what's Brexit? Okay, we're leaving the EU. All right, fuck it. Let's go. Let's do it. Do you know what it means?
Absolutely.
No idea. Brexit means Brexit. And it's same thing with Trump. It's like, I remember I remember on the election night, on the day before the election, or the morning of the election, and there was a Hillary supporter, and cultish, believing she was going to win by like 300 and some votes. And I said, fine, I'll bet you, if I win and Trump either wins or Trump breaks, I forget the number, or Hillary doesn't break 300, you wear Bernie Sanders shirt and vice versa. He was in a cult. He had no idea. I'm like, I don't see how she wins. And I didn't necessarily believe I know this sounds weird. In one sense, I didn't think she was going to win. I thought she was going to win. By the same token, I couldn't see how he was going to lose. if that makes sense. Um,
Definitely. No, I understand. There was that sense of her being almost, what's the word, coronated or anointed as the next president without actually earning the votes. And I think
yeah,
for a lot of us, we just assumed that was going to go
yeah.
in her favor.
I think she thought it too. She assumed it too. Like, it's my turn. Like, what do you mean turn? You earn it. You win it. It's not a turn. It's not a turn. We don't coordinate you like royalty. It's not like, I think much of the election felt like a certain part of the country said, this is the person who's going to be president. You just got to accept it. That's what it felt like. And a lot of us was like, no. The bulk of us apparently said no. And she lost. And they haven't been able to get over the fact that she lost. That's what a lot of this boils down to. All of this Russian nonsense, all of this stuff, the castigating of certain journalists or certain people who are pushing against the counter narrative. They wanted her to win and she lost. That's what it was. Honestly, I think a lot of this boils down to that. She lost, magnificently lost. It's a reality show who said that.
I agree. And I think that her lack of accountability and the Democratic Party's lack of accountability is hurting their own interests to this day. But in the last few minutes, we've got about 6 minutes of this segment left. And I was wondering, I've been asking most of the guests to kind of like address Julian Assange if he was able to watch this. We don't know that he'll be able to, but I wanted to get people's thoughts on what you would say to him if he was able to see this.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Like, and I don't mean that in this kind of, I don't mean this in this perfunctory way. I mean this in this kind of acknowledgement that everybody who does something good, oftentimes if it's big, they take a hit for it. Like, I would imagine Martin Luther King walking across a bridge in Selma didn't necessarily want to get beat by cops, but he understood this beating is going to go, And I would imagine anybody who's pushing in a particular struggle understands that just because you do good doesn't necessarily mean good follows you. You do it because it's good. I get it. And I would argue that what he's doing goes beyond this idea of, look, I don't think it's easy being stuck in an embassy. I don't think it's easy by the least. But I acknowledge that what he did, and by virtue of the emphasis that these intelligence services and even the governments are putting on him, kind of gets across the gravity of what he's doing. All I can say is thank you. I mean, there's not much else you can say about that. The impact that Assange has had, either in the United States, from the standpoint of independent media, and from the standpoint of people who pay attention to this stuff, has been monumental. And look, whatever you want to think, good, bad, or somewhere in between, Julian Assange has definitely had an effect. And personally, from somebody else who believes that effect is necessary, considering the depravity of what we consider to be journalism these days. Honestly, you can look at any story. Just pick up your Washington Post, pick up your New York Times, and intelligence sources said this. Journalist spook told me this, and the entire article would just be what somebody told the person, as if they were a stenographer. Now, clearly, if somebody is just telling you that, like, this is the stuff that we want you to know. But what is the stuff that you don't want me to know? That's the stuff that needs to be the decision maker, or that's the stuff that I really want to know, per se. I know that sounds weird, but yeah, I want to know the stuff that they're not telling me, because it's
Oh,
government.
exactly. That's an important point. Definitely.
But I guess my point is mainly thank you. Yeah, there's not much else I could say around it. It's appreciated, and there's no way to ever really get across the level of appreciation. I'm sorry that the person has to take it. I really am, but I do appreciate what they're going through.
Thank you. And to your point about being the media often being a stenographer of the state, that's actually exactly word for word what the incredible John Pilger said about the media.
Really?
And the fact that, yeah, he literally used the phrase stenographer of the state. And I think that's such a perceptive, evaluation of,
Don't take my word for it.
And we know that there are so many CIA agents that work with the media or are members of the media. It's incredible. So I think stenography is exactly right.
What is CBS? He used to work for Los Angeles Times or something, and they fired him because they found him giving stories to the CIA to be edited. I can't think of his name, John Hillebrand or something. And then he's working now for some media outlet, but the guy keeps his job. It's like they know that the guy was a spook who worked feeding his stories to the CIA to get vetted. and yet he keeps his job. He keeps his job. I can't think of his name. He's the guy who released that information talking about Trump and Kim Jong-un. Sources say XYZ,
Yes.
and you find out it's like, oh, it's that guy. That guy's.
I know what you're talking about. I've forgotten his name as well, but I know that my colleague at Disability Media actually covered that issue.
Yeah.
So I feel bad that I don't remember his name either right now, but I know what you're talking about.
I can't think of his name. WikiLeaks have even brought him out, showed him on Twitter saying, look, this guy,
Yeah.
he's in the WikiLeaks documents himself. I can't think of his name. Sorry.
Not a problem at all. Thank you so much for spending your time with us this weekend. I know that everyone who participates in this vigil is, they're taking time out of their schedule to express the solidarity with Julian Assange. I really appreciate you joining us, and it's been great to talk to you. So thank you, Jamarl.
I appreciate you inviting me. I'm sorry for being late and camera issues, but no, thank you.
Not a problem.
Thank you for bringing me in. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you. And if we have to, have another vigil, then I hope to see you back, and we'll discuss what has unfolded between. Okay, just 1 second. We're going to take a break now, and then we're going to go into the next guest with us. But thank you again, Jamarl, for spending your afternoon with us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You too.